Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Scott Edinburgh. I'm the founder of Personal MBA Coach, and I'm joined by two amazing students and former clients of ours, Niso and Sasha. Niso is at Booth, and Sasha just graduated from Kellogg. So we'll hear from each of them shortly about their experiences. And today we'll talk about Chicago Booth and Kellogg. We'll talk about the essays and many other things. Feel free to ask any questions throughout the session, and towards the end, we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. Any questions that we don't get to answer, feel free to just shoot them over via email, scott@personalmbacoach.com. So I'll give a little bit of background about Personal MBA Coach and myself, for those of you that haven't had the pleasure of chatting with us so far. So we were, top ranked U.S. Consulting firm last year on some other leading sites. We were invited to speak at the annual GMAT conference a couple years ago. We have a 96% success rate, and our clients got in last year with $6.5 million in scholarships. We have former M7 interviewers as well as top 10, and all clients that work with us receive direct one-on-one support either from myself or from a former M7 MBA admissions director. So this is the team. I went to MIT for undergrad, worked at Deloitte in consulting for a few years, and then went to Wharton for the MBA. And I'm on the board of directors for AGAC. That's the Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants. We do different things with admissions directors. There's a conference every year where we analyze these fake profiles and debate who's getting accepted and rejected and why. I'm also joined by Nicole Shea, who spent the last 6 years at Columbia Business School as an admissions director. Now I've been lucky enough to have her join our team, as well as MJ Shores, who's a former Wharton and UCLA admissions director. And I run the company with my sister, who's a former Forte scholar, used to work at Bain, Mars, and US Airways, and went to Yale for the MBA. So we help through all the parts of the process, from early planning. Say if any of you are watching this and you're not planning on applying yet, you're just sort of thinking ahead to plan ahead. It's great to do so. So if you're applying in the next few months or maybe even to 3 years from now, we can help you with strategy building and how you can really improve your profile ahead of time. I think Nisha and I did some of that work. Then we have private tutoring. So GMAT, GRE, and executive assessment tutoring. Sasha is actually one of our tutors as well. So former client and a tutor. We have in-house software that we use to guide through the sessions with modules, sample questions, thousands of answers, full-length exams, and we have some pretty customized, kind of one-on-one methodologies to use for tutoring. So we'll talk more about us in a few minutes, but here today, right, we're talking about Kellogg and Booth. Feel free to ask questions about anything else. We tend to keep this pretty casual. If we were in person, we would raise our hands and kind of chat about anything. But in the latest rankings, Kellogg and Booth rose quite a bit, so to 3 and 4. And so I'll talk a little bit about what sets Kellogg apart. And then when Sasha gets on to chat, she'll talk about her experiences as a student at Kellogg, and she'll know well more than I would probably know. So very collaborative social environment. Kellogg sends a lot of students into tech, marketing, and consulting. This is one of the beautiful new buildings that they have on campus. A lot of international travel programs. I remember that's one thing that really stuck out to me. All the different opportunities that you can have, and I think now that things are getting a bit better, some of these programs will be coming back. And there's also a dedicated semester in Silicon Valley where you can take classes and do an internship. So it's part of the week is taking classes, part of the week is doing an internship. So if you really want to get some access to tech in Silicon Valley, it's a great place to go. And beautiful Chicago suburb on the water, so it's fantastic. These are just a few things. Now, Chicago Booth, big building, lots of light, very analytical. So they teach a lot of theory, a lot of how to make strategic decisions and how to be smart about making these decisions. A lot of economists, teach these courses, and there's quite a bit of flexibility. So there are no required courses at Booth, and that's something that is really interesting to note. If you contrast that with, let's say, Harvard Business School, which is obviously ranked a little bit higher, the whole first year is set, and you can't take anything separately from those courses. Whereas at Booth, you have full flexibility. It's a little bit closer to the city, so you're in downtown Chicago. And so some folks, like that from an access standpoint. Okay, so I'll pass this off to Sasha to tell us a little bit about her background and her experiences so far.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Again, my name is Sasha Reznikova. This slide briefly kind of overview of my background. I was an undergrad at Penn where I studied economics and Italian. After graduation, I did 2 years at American Express and then 2 years at United Airlines doing credit card marketing. Really enjoyed kind of working with marketing as a function, but realized I was not quite as passionate about credit cards themselves. So I applied to business school to switch over to do brand management. Really wanted to go into consumer packaged goods and really have ownership over something. And for that, I think Kellogg has kind of no second. So was really fortunate to kind of have found Scott and work with him on my applications. Got into Kellogg, and as you can see from my name, I just graduated, so technically I don't think I count as a current MBA, but I'll milk it as long as I can. And I will be starting at Colgate-Palmolive doing brand management in September. So I'd say kind of I got out of the program what I wanted. If you had to ask me what I would change, it would probably be that I wish you didn't have a pandemic, but what can you do? But I would say to the point of kind of what I think makes Kellogg special is I really want to kind of emphasize how the focus really is on kind of collaboration and authenticity. Like it really felt that all of the classmates and everyone really brings their true selves to it. And, the teamwork that I've seen over the past 2 years that I was at school is, I think, second to none. It's really important. I think it's something that the school really talks about. Everyone that would talk when they talk about Kellogg says, it's so collaborative. Everyone is so nice. And it really is actually that way. Like we've had so many times that people would come in and step up, help each other out. And especially I think during these 2 years, it's been a very special experience. And the school I think has done a fantastic job, being flexible and transitioning to kind of how can you best make the most out of all the experiences that you can when you are limited kind of as you are now. So highly recommend, happy to answer any questions that come up about Kellogg, about the essays, experience. I loved my time there. So really happy to talk more about it. Scott, did I cover everything? Great. Or is there anything else you want me to say?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much, Sasha. Actually, I had a question. What would you tell someone about Kellogg that maybe you didn't know about beforehand, or that surprised you, or something that's not easy to find on the website? Because often we hear from folks, I'm doing the research and everybody kind of looks the same, and how do I really get to know a place?
Yeah, I think one thing that I feel like is not as talked about as much is how. So it's framed slightly differently than I think it's experienced. So one thing that really is talked about is how much there's a lot of leadership opportunities at Kellogg. Like there's a lot of emphasis that Kellogg gives first and second years a lot of opportunities to lead the student body, lead the clubs, get really involved to drive the Kellogg experience. And one thing I think to kind of really emphasize that from having gone through it is the amount of kind of giving back that I find that second years do to lead, provide leadership in the program, I think is immense because I think as first years you go in, you're trying to recruit, you're trying to build a social life, you're trying to get involved in clubs, and you're trying to kind of figure out how do you go back to being in school. And I think second years really provide a guiding light. And it's a culture that inspires, like a lot of people go and be like, wow, second years helped me so much that going in and, I want to give back as a second year. And it's even to the point of like one example is orientation for new students is run almost entirely by the rising second years. And I think there's this really great culture, like transition of culture that's instilled kind of from the beginning that I think makes Kellogg really special. Like you really get the sense from day one that the students love the school and love their experience. And you get a lot of opportunities to truly kind of give back and put your own spin on it once you get to second year as well.
Great. Well, thanks so much. So we'll chat more with you in a little bit. So Niso, I'll let you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hey everybody. So my name is Niso, and I'm natively from Zimbabwe, currently at Booth. And in my other life, I was an accountant, right? So what I'm using the MBA for is to transition from a finance and accounting role into more a strategy and entrepreneurship role. And so I'm currently doing a summer with McKinsey. And from the time I got into Booth, I didn't know too much about entrepreneurship. Have founded a startup, raised two rounds of funding. My startup placed in the new venture challenge, which really is Booth's flagship entrepreneurial competition, and I think it's the most oldest and most well-funded in the US and maybe even in the world. And so it's really been an exciting 9 months. It's indescribable, like Sasha put it. In terms of what I think sets Booth apart is really, again, something Scott spoke to, which is the flexible curriculum. And so the ability to tailor how you want your day, your month, your week to look like. So for example, you could take morning classes versus evening classes or afternoon classes. More importantly, you can tailor which classes you take and when you take them, right? So if you don't want, so I have an accounting background, so I don't have to take an accounting class. Which is something that you don't get in a lot of places, and that really drew me to Booth. And so, for example, I knew I wanted to focus on strategy. I was coming from a finance career, so I didn't take finance classes. I took strategy and entrepreneurship classes, which were very helpful in like my entrepreneurial and my strategy career, and currently in my consulting career. Did I miss anything, Scott?
No, that's great. That's great. So thanks so much, and thanks for coming back. And we've done a number of these before, and super excited to have you. So any questions you have on recruiting, McKinsey, how that works, that would be great. And we worked with Niso, it's okay to say, across 2 different seasons to sort of improve yourself. So it's been a journey. So thanks so much for being here.
Cheers, Scott.
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about essay writing. It's a multi-step process, right? So first you have to brainstorm, what are you covering? And one thing we do with all of our clients before we start anything is a whole brainstorming session. We figure out, details about your interest and your passions and your challenges. We talk about the professional goals, give very, very frank feedback on how realistic they should be and, what you want to put in those. So it's a brainstorm, right? Make sure you have the right ideas, but also make sure to not spend too much time brainstorming. Sometimes we have to give clients feedback that, hey, it's mid-July, let's keep moving, right? Let's pick up the pace. So keep in mind the deadlines. If you're applying in round 1 and you're still in this like brainstorming phase where you're trying to fit everything together and pull the right elements from your background, you might be doing yourself a bit of a disservice because writing takes a long time. So brainstorm, get a few ideas, and then start to outline. Outlining is good. Often when we work with clients, we'll have them submit a brief outline where it's maybe instead of a 450-word essay, you're writing 40 words or something. And that way we can give them feedback to make sure that you're spending the right amount of time on the right items. And even from Kellogg to Booth, similar schools, right? Both in the same city, but admissions directors are different. What they're looking for is different. Their personalities vary. So it's really important to know what are you putting in each of these essays and, how many examples to use. So that's why outlining is helpful. And then you're drafting, of course, editing, really as many times as you need to, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and then don't forget to proofread it. So that's a bit about the process. So some guiding principles before you get into the Kellogg and Booth essays. Answer the question asked, right? This seems really basic, and if you drop off, I don't blame you, and it was nice to see you. But really, don't write something if the school does not ask you. Now, let's take Kellogg, for example. They do not say, why do you want an MBA and why Kellogg? So if you're writing in your essay why you want to go to Kellogg, or you're writing in your essay, why the MBA is right for you or what classes you're going to take, you're just missing the mark. And sometimes people try to do that. They think, well, I've got this, interest and passions thing, and so therefore at Kellogg, here's what I want to do. Don't do that, right? Just answer the question asked. Unless you're working with an expert who can guide you differently, and I'll tell you that's not how I would guide you for Kellogg, don't write something that's not otherwise asked. And be authentic. At the end of the day, if you're writing about being a leader, and you are, 27 years old, we know that you haven't led, Fortune 100 companies, leading teams of 200 people, raising millions of dollars in funds. Probably, if you have, great. You're probably one step ahead of others, but otherwise, most of you probably haven't. So just be authentic, and make sure that you're keeping your language succinct, approachable. This is not a time when you get really flowery. We're not writing this isn't even what matters most to you and why. Where there's this huge passion story, right? These are a little bit more sort of specific essays for schools that want specific things. So try to be succinct, be approachable. Admissions directors read tons of applications at a time, and they spend a certain number of minutes per app, and I can go over that maybe in another session. So you don't want to have people lose focus. When possible, pick a unique topic. Only when possible. Otherwise, you really want to pick something that allows you to put your best foot forward. Okay, so Kellogg Essay 1. Kellogg's purpose is to educate, equip, and inspire brave leaders who create lasting value. Great. Provide a recent example where you have demonstrated leadership and created value. Those are two things, right? You have to demonstrate leadership and you have to create value. What challenges did you face? So now something bad happened, right? And what did you learn? So it's a 4-part question. Tip 1, answer all 4 parts. If you skip any of those parts, you didn't follow the directions. So make sure to answer all 4 parts. There's not an exact number of words per section, but answer all the 4 parts. Try to think about something that has clear value. Now, it doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be, I've saved 20% on, such and such. But make sure that there is some value, right? Set up the story and walk through it. So this is like situation, action, result. So really be cognizant here. And also this is one time. So I'm just giving some initial tips. Obviously, if we were to work together, we go into much more depth as far as how you can answer that. But some initial tips here. This is one story. So it's a recent example. And don't ignore the word recent. So don't pick something from college. If it happened 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it is not a recent example. Essay 2 is all about values. So values are what guide you in your life and work. What values are important to you and how have they influenced you? So here, right, again, authenticity is really important here. If you're going to write some value that might just sound good, it may or may not actually work in your favor, right? So be honest. Maybe you have an athletic value. Maybe you have a musical value. This does not have to be like a Mother Teresa type of value. You just want to be honest here and talk about why you're doing the things that you're doing. And the goal here is to get a sense of you, right? So it's not so much the values that they're interested in. They're interested in how you think, what you've done. And actually, Sasha, I know I didn't prep you for this, but I'm curious. I mean, anything else you want to add here about why you think Kellogg kind of switched, because they switched the values somewhat recently. I mean, why this is something that comes up, and what other things do you think that they're looking for from this question?
Yeah, I think the main thing, and I think I briefly mentioned it on my intro, like authenticity is 100% key with this, and I think what they're really interested in is building a class of people that kind of stand for something and that will fight for something. And I think having students that will bring their whole self to school is something that's really important to them. Like one of the things that Kellogg does, and I was very impressed with, during your orientation, somewhere on like day 2 or day 3 of you having just met some of your classmates, you go off and you do a 5-person breakout where you talk about what has been your journey. And you're prepped, like you're told about this before the summer. And so you go in and people talk about like, what are your key, they call them crucible moments. Like, what are the things that define you? And, I came in expecting, people will keep some things back, but the fact that everyone from, this was day 2, day 3, came in and you hear some heavy stuff that people have gone through and you really feel connected. And I think the one reason why you have an essay like this is it's kind of prepping people that Kellogg is really big on personal reflection, introspection. I think this kind of starts the process for what to expect in your 2 years of you actually being at Kellogg, because so much of it is focused on reflection and kind of thinking about who you are as a person, who you want to be as a leader, and finding different ways to kind of suss out the nuance amongst it.
Great. Thank you. Super helpful. Super helpful here. Okay, so these are the Kellogg essays. We're going to move on to Booth. Booth is interesting because there's no word limit. So how will the Booth MBA help you achieve your immediate and long-term post-MBA career goals? The first question you might ask is, how long should the essay be? Usually about 500 words, right? So that's what we say, 400 to 500 words. The reason there's no limit is because they really want to test whether you are able to be concise, whether you're able to know what is the right length, what is not the right length. I was just on a session with a chat session with a webinar with Chad yesterday from Harvard, and very, very, very similar. No limit there, right? And so he was telling us how sometimes they see very short essays that get in, and very long essays where they say, "Why did you write so long? If you had stopped 2/3 of the way in, you probably would have gotten in." But then you ended up finishing, and maybe it didn't quite work out. So here, what do you want to do, right? Show how your past experiences have prepared you. Now, they only say, how will the Booth MBA help you achieve your immediate and long-term goals? If you ignore everything about the past, then you're probably not writing the best essay. At the same time, and I won't go into all the details. Again, this is just sort of some high-level guidance. But at the same time, if you write a lot about the past, that's not really what they're looking for. So you don't want to come in here with 250 words about everything you've done and what your grandmother meant to you and how your parents first moved to the country with no money. Focus on you here and focus on just the background so that it can set up the context for what you want to do going forward. Now, as far as the goals, they really should be specific and ownable. I know that you probably don't know what you want to do, and many people don't know what they want to do, even when they're in school, even 5 years out of school. People make lots of changes these days. Gone are the days where you go to General Electric and you spend 40 years in your career and then you retire and have a great severance. So people are moving around, but you have to have one path and decide what that path is and own it and talk about it. Then once you get to school, of course, you can go and do something different. Short and long-term goals. And this is important because the short term is going to lead up to the long term. But if you have to spend a little bit more time on one of them, spend it on the short term. It's easier to, think about. It's easier to predict. And then you want to be very clear about what you're going to get from Booth, right? So this is where you'll talk about classes and you'll talk about, clubs and things like that. This is a pretty straightforward essay. Some of the ways that people mess up here is if they just do things that they shouldn't do, like, I don't know, make it be too personal. Have long laundry list of classes. I'm going to show you, the 9 classes that I want to take at Booth and why it's right for me. So before we go on to the next essay, Niso, any other thoughts here? Anything else that you would add from an advisor standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, to a point Sasha raised earlier, you have to kind of be a little, actually pretty authentic in how you want to write this. So when I first came to you, Scott, I was writing an essay to get into business school. When we were done, I had almost a career map for where I wanted my career to go. And through the process, I thought about so many different options and alternatives and how things would work out. And I think, it's so useful to almost get to that level where it's not just about the essay to get in, but it forces you to consciously think about where you want to take your career, And so that's the advice that I would have is actually think critically about what you want to do. And also think about making, moving the needle a little bit from your past to your present, to your short term and your long term. And so you don't go from, being an accountant to being a ballroom dancer, but you just move the needle a little bit, and every little step kind of helps you get to the next level, right? So, your past links to your short term links to where you ultimately want to be.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I forgot about that. You don't get any credit for being ambitious with goals, and this is something that if I have some of my clients here watching, you might laugh. Something I tell clients all the time: there's no credit for writing that you want to do something that's super, super ambitious. I'd rather you just write something a little bit more realistic. And it's not to say that we don't, believe that you can do something, but goals are meant just to confirm that the school can help you to get there. And what happens, we'll do another talk. We actually have a talk behind the MBA admissions curtain with some former M7 admissions directors in a couple days. Or if you're watching this later, then it's recorded somewhere on YouTube. And we'll talk a little bit about what happens when admissions directors read things, but they just want to see whether the school can help you to accomplish the goals. So if the goal is too ambitious, they might wonder, even if it's of no fault of yours, whether the school can actually help you to get there. Whereas if you write something that is a more common path, then an admissions director might read it and say, okay, great, that can happen. So often I hear hesitations from clients. I don't just want to write consultant because that's, quote, too common. Why? If plenty of people are going to consulting firms and you think you'll go, why not? Niso's at McKinsey. Is that the most unique thing in the world? No, it's an amazing job. A lot of people want to get there, and a lot of people go to consulting firms. So, why not write that if that feels like that is you? Essay 2. This is a bit more personal, and I'm curious to hear, Niso, from you if people have talked about the things that they wrote in their essays once they're in school. So maybe I'll ask you that. You can think about that and answer that in a couple minutes. So in MBAs is as much about personal growth as it is about professional development. In addition to sharing your experience about goals in terms of career, we'd like to learn more about you outside of the office. So that's a key. Don't write anything to do with work outside the office. Use this opportunity to tell us something about who you are, something very open-ended. Probably can't get a more open-ended question than this. It's even more open-ended than Stanford, what matters most to you and why. That's one thing that matters to you most. This is just something about who you are. It could be anything. So, here, first of all, this is personal, right? If you're showing them something about you, make sure that it's something clear, right? Think about your passions and what makes you unique, circumstances. This isn't exactly your Kellogg essay, right? And Booth knows what Kellogg asks for their essays. And so you don't just want to take your values essay and just sort of paste it in here, but you can have a component there. Don't be afraid to be really, really personal here. So if you, let's say, are a very talkative person and you're always the social butterfly and you're the one that brings people together and you always run for student council and, that might be something about you. And then Chicago Booth would want to know this so that they can see if they're putting together a whole class, this is the role that, Scott would play versus Niso. And one of the reasons they're asked this is to see what kinds of people they can bring in on campus and to have, this well-rounded class. At the same time, maybe you really want to showcase this great extracurricular leadership experience that you have. And you've been waiting to write it in an essay. It doesn't fit in the goals essay. Perhaps you can write about that here. But again, make sure that you circle back to something about who you are, not just what you've done. Niso, any other thoughts or anything else you might want to add here?
Again, I keep coming back to Sasha's point about authenticity. I can't emphasize that enough. It's important that you're able to bring your full self to the essay, and not just the self that you think you want to portray. I never understood this until I got in, right? And then, I got into Booth and several other programs. And then you're looking around the room and you're seeing all these people that are really great, brilliant at different things. And that's kind of what makes the MBA program specifically, at Booth, because that's what I can speak to. But I know it's very much similar to a lot of other schools too, top schools anyway. It's just that diversity within the class, and that diversity is brought about by the authenticity of people bringing out their unique experiences. So, like Scott said, the first step is brainstorming. So think about, even those little things that you didn't think were unique that make you unique, right?
Great. Thank you, Nisha. So these are some errors in personal story essays. Having too much detail, right? At the end of the day, if you're going to tell a story, figure out the main part of the story. If you've got too much stuff about the past or all the details, it's going to derail you. If something's illogical or too vague, if you're not working with a professional, obviously most people using consultants, but let's say you're not, which is totally fine, have somebody else read your essays, right? Someone that doesn't know you, that's not in the industry. I think that's really important. So again, last year our clients got over $6.5 million in scholarships. We've had many folks get full rides, and Kellogg Booth actually pretty good at giving scholarships. So 50, 80, 100,000. Should pull the exact stats. But our averages for scholarships for Kellogg Booth are probably some of the highest of any schools out there. And our clients go to all the leading top schools. So for those that maybe didn't join at the beginning, boutique, family operated for the last 14 years. If you sign up with us, you can work directly with myself, the founder, throughout the process, or one of my former admissions directors. And then we have editors. So you'll have one main consultant plus one editor who has PhD or masters from top Ivy League schools, teaches English or used to teach English. And we have clients to network with at all the top schools. I usually do different meetup events and things in different cities and project management systems. So things stay pretty structured throughout the process. A little bit about what we do. Obviously tutoring, right? And as mentioned, Sasha is actually one of our tutors. So GMAT, GRE, I should add executive assessment tutoring here as well. Some schools are starting to accept the executive assessment, not Kellogg or Booth, but other schools. Brainstorm will help you to develop your stories. Select the schools based on your personality and interest and background. Unlimited essay editing and resume editing. Recommendation assistance, who you should ask and what key points they should write about. You have a whole process there and a lot of sort of IP there to help you, to help the recommenders. And then interviews. We have a lot of former interviewers from many top schools. You can find out more information, visit our website, personalmbacoach.com, or shoot an email to Scott at personalmbacoach.com. So I think at this point, we'll probably go to questions. I know there's some questions here. I'll start answering them. If you have any other questions that you want to ask, feel free to ask questions. And if we run out of questions, we'll just go to other tips. I can talk for hours about MBA admissions, so we'll certainly fill up the time here. Okay, so we'll go to the first question. Let's see. Is it possible to get a scholarship to these universities? Yes. Yeah, so as I just mentioned there, definitely a lot of scholarship opportunities at both Kellogg and Booth. And then the next part of it was what all must be in the profile or resume. Well, so I'll talk a bit, and then Niso, Sasha, if you have anything to add, feel free to add. If not, that's totally cool. But I think there are two main components, maybe three main components that schools are looking for. One is the academic potential. So if the test score is really high, great, you'll get more money. Often a sales pitch for us to our existing clients, as far as GMAT scores, is get a higher score, you'll get more money at the end of the day from a school if all else is equal. Second is how strong is the application, right? So one of the reasons we do so well with scholarships is the essays are just really good. And so folks, do well, the schools like them, and they're more likely to give them money. And the third is just what kind of value they think you'll bring to campus. If you, come to school and you're this amazing campus contributor, student body president and things like that, it seems like you'll be one of those people. Maybe they're more likely to give you money. What else am I missing out on? What are your thoughts, either of you?
Probably I'd say having, as you're thinking about professionally, for making sure you have a variety of skills that you're demonstrating. So as you're thinking about, I know I always had trouble in my resume, I wanted to put too much into it. So figuring out how do you edit it down to kind of the key important things that show diversity in what you can do. And I think there can also be some, and again, Scott, you can disagree, personalization around which are the skills that are more emphasized that are a little bit more tailored to the school. If for Booth, since it's so analytical, you got to show that you can do the analytics. Great, thank you.
So another question, will certificates be of value in the resume? So I think if you mean certificates like extra classes that you take, analytical certificates, things like that, the answer is yes. The undergrad GPA is going to be most important, right? And to some extent, taking courses can offset that, but the courses should be graded and they should be courses that you pay for. So if you're not paying a school and you're not getting a letter grade, it's not really worth much. So yes, certificates certainly can be helpful. All right, so Jiho has a question for Niso, actually. So Niso, for having felt like you didn't know much about entrepreneurship, how did you approach talking about that career interest in your essays? Or I'll rephrase it, or did you talk about that?
Yeah, good question, Jiho. So maybe let me start off by saying I did know about entrepreneurship. It's not like I was absolutely clueless, right? I tried to do startups twice and failed. And I would add, I've been at Booth for 9 months and I've already, like I said, raised 2 rounds of funding. And I have a huge team, right? We have a team. At some point, we had a team of 13 people who are the cream of the cream in what they do, right? But coming back to the question, how did I write about it? So I believed I have an entrepreneurial spirit, and that's kind of what I wrote about in the essay, right? Like, I think I can use my entrepreneurial spirit to help change the world and make it a better place in a very specific way. But what I need is this skill set that I can pick up from Booth, specifically, through 2 key people and this is one of the biggest reasons I chose Booth, right? So Booth has 2 professors. One is the new venture strategy professor, Gregory Bunch. He's fantastic, right? And so I wanted to learn about strategy from the best. And not only does he teach it, he advises, right? And he's also an entrepreneur himself, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is I also talked about Professor Mark Tebby. So Professor Tebby runs the New Venture Challenge, which, like I said, is the second biggest, if not the biggest, student-led startup competition in the US, if not the world, right? And so I interacted with the school, I engaged with the school, and I got to learn about these resources. And I specifically talked about them and how I was going to use them. And did I use them the way that I had said I would in my essay? It's actually been 10 times better than I thought, right? But the point is, I needed to start somewhere, and I did. And so that's kind of how I talked about it. Like, I have this skill set, and I have like this passion and desire, and to get to a certain goal, this is where Booth fits in, specifically with the entrepreneurial and strategic toolkit that they can, that I can pick up when I'm there.
Great. So this is another question. Probably I'll pass this on to you, Niso, again. With Booth being known as a finance school, how do you rate the strategy course and other soft skill courses?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the first things that we did when we got to Booth was go through LEAD. LEAD is a leadership development program. That's the first thing you do, or the first class you take at Booth. And that helps you build your soft skills, but it also helps you get to know yourself. And so what enabled me to be able to lead a startup with a team of 13 people with no prior experience was 2 things. Firstly, is the leadership training through LEAD. So the soft skills that you're talking about, right? How to create space for other people on a team, in a room, how to take up enough space but not too much, how to lead people. And then the second thing skill set that I did pick up was thinking through ambiguity, right? Like I have always been an entrepreneur, but the one thing Booth gave me is confidence. And this is confidence with dealing with ambiguity, right? So I can walk into a situation with, in a business setup and have confidence that I might not know anything about the business or the situation, but I have a framework in my mind to solve the problem. And so back to your question, how would I rate them? Right at the top. And not only because of that, but also because of the faculty, right? You think about the Nobel laureates within the Booth faculty, the amazing classmates that you have. So it's just, overall, it's really fantastic. I highly recommend it.
Sasha, let me actually ask you a similar version of that question, right? Because often I hear from folks, well, I'm not interested in the soft stuff and consulting so much and marketing, so I don't want to go to Kellogg, and I want to do banking, so I want to go to the Booth and not Kellogg. And it doesn't exactly work that way. So I guess tell us a little bit about your experiences there with the courses and the analytics, soft courses versus hard courses.
So I think, with the soft courses, I think Kellogg is fantastic at it. There's some of the most popular courses are focused around like selling yourself and your ideas, personal leadership insights, which focuses kind of on that introspection, like who are you as a leader and as a person, and who do you want to be. Leader as Coach was one of my favorite classes. If any of you go to Kellogg, highly recommend. It's basically like, how do you carry and work through conversations in order to get the people that you're leading to kind of have the best outcome. So the soft skills, I think, have been fantastic. In terms of the hard skills, I think that's something that Kellogg is not as known for as Booth. I've been incredibly impressed, by the level of faculty. Like for me, so unlike Niso, I cannot do accounting. My brain just doesn't fold into T accounts. I've tried, and I was terrified. We had a requirement for that. I was terrified to go in. Probably one of the best professors I had was an accounting one. And the level, I think, of how much expertise they can help give you, but then also the willingness of everyone to kind of meet with you and help has been kind of fantastic. The interesting thing is I've had a lot of friends that came in and, Kellogg doesn't require you to have a major. Most people wind up with one or two, but it's no longer required. I've had so many friends that came in as maybe marketing focused people that have come out with finance majors because the classes have been kind of that interesting, and they felt like it was the best way to kind of equip them for their careers going forward. Great.
Thank you. Okay, so we have another question. Okay, so at both Booth and Kellogg, for full-time jobs, recruiting, OCR, do you compete with part-time MBA students as well? I guess are part-time students also recruiting for jobs through the on-campus recruiting? I don't know how familiar either of you are with that. I can speak to that as well, if that's helpful.
I can take a stab at it. So for Kellogg, the way that there's two paths for recruiting. One is it's called on-campus, and one is just in time. So the on-campus, that's where, if you pictured, like, the company will come to Kellogg, they will say, we want to do a formal job posting, we want to collect resumes and applications for this job, and then we will come on campus and interview 10 people in the first round, 10, 15, 16, however much they designate. And in that process, usually for full-time, that's going to be done like in the fall. That's just for the full-time students. So part-time are not part of that selection. On the other hand, for the just-in-time, that's what it sounds like. That's for job postings that go on the board for companies that are hiring more kind of as need arises, rather than kind of these more established programs like a lot of consulting firms or tech firms that would do on campus. And for those, if it's more on the general job board, like part-timers do have access to it. So it's not limited to just full-time. Hopefully that's helpful.
Great. Yeah, and one thing I'll add to folks that are thinking about part-time versus full-time. We do a lot of work with both part-time and the full-time programs, and these two schools have two of the best part-time programs out there, with a lot of good access. As Sasha mentioned there. Niso, anything else you want to add from the Booth perspective?
Yeah, I'd actually just like to add that we don't, as a full-time student, you don't compete with part-time students. You collaborate with them. Right. So, I'd encourage you to think about consulting recruiting, not as you versus your classmates. That's not how it works. It's more like your school versus other schools. If you think about it that way, you then realize that iron sharpens iron, right? So when you collaborate and you do cases and you do mock interviews and you speak to, part-time students, it only helps you get better, right? So for example, I know one top accounting firm where, 90% of their intake is from Booth, for example, right? And so if you collaborate with those people during the preparation, it only helps your chances to get better. I hope that's helpful. I also encourage cross-school collaboration in your preparation. At the end of the day, it just only helps you get better.
Yeah, exactly. I remember an experience when I was recruiting the Wharton, and we were standing in a room. This was pre-COVID, where everyone just goes around and there's drinks at a hotel, and everyone is just talking about something better that the other person did. Nobody really talked about themselves, and there was one recruiter, and I think that just sort of speaks to how that's helpful. So Jiho, question: how much lead time to reach out to work with a consultant is necessary if you're looking to apply in round one? I recommend reaching out now. Yeah, I think that it's getting late. We are still taking folks for round one. We'd certainly love to work with you, but now would be a great time to reach out, because it's really not a question of how much lead time, right? It's a question of how many schools are you going to apply to, because at some point, we'll only have time for X schools, and if you want to do 6, 7, 8 schools, and it's August, that doesn't feel so good, right? So I would reach out now if you're thinking about round one, so we could try to maximize the number of schools for you. Another question: minimum number of years of experience to apply for top business schools. So I'll there is no minimum. I will talk about averages, right? So the average is 5 years. Okay, if you're at 4 years, is that different than 5? No. We send people with just 1 or 2 years of experience to M7 schools every year, and it's not just one person. But that gets harder to sell. So let's say if you've been working for a year and you're looking to apply now to matriculate next year after 2 years, I think really the question is, why is it the right time for you? If you can prove that you've done it a lot, that's great. Now, if you've been, an analyst at Pepsi for a year and you want to apply to business school, that might be a harder story to sell. But if you've done some really great things, you've had a lot of leadership experiences, I would like to evaluate on an individual, case. But usually you're looking at 3, 4, 5 years of experience at least. And then on the other end, you can be older too. You can have more than the average number of years of experience and still be fine. Niso is on the other end, kind of past the average, and that's still fine. So there is a range for a reason. Okay. What is the average work experience required? Okay. Well, actually, so I just answered that. Can qualitative work experience have a chance of getting in? Yeah, so qualitative, quantitative, you don't have to do investment banking to get into business school. So absolutely. People do a lot of different things, and people are doing, Teach for America, Teach for India. They're doing, nonprofit work, family business work. There are a lot of folks that do family business and real estate work, marketing. So a lot of different things that you could do. And in fact, schools want people from different backgrounds. So if anybody is here with a non-traditional background, wanting to go to Booth, maybe thinking that they're not analytical enough, great. Send us an email, give us a call. We'd love to try to get you in, because schools need well-rounded, folks. They can't have everybody doing the same thing. So then there's a question from Saranya. Is it a problem if you have greater than the average year of experience? Say, 8, 10 years. That's not a problem. I think really when you're at that 10-year mark, that's when schools start to think, is there another way of delivering the content that might be better for you? It's not that they won't take you if you have 10 years of experience. Every year we send people with more than 10 years of experience to full-time programs, but those numbers start to get a little bit, smaller, because schools sometimes think, okay, there might be a better way of delivering the program content that would be, more helpful to you in your career. And part of it is like, what makes sense for you? I talked to a woman this morning who was in Toronto. We had a great call, and she was thinking between 1 year and executive programs. And at the end of it, I said, look, looking at the resume, what you've done, all of your classmates in business school would love to get the role that you already have. So why go backwards? Why not just go forwards and do an executive MBA program that might be a little bit better for you? So it's not even so much about like the chances of quote getting in. It's what is best for you and your career. And for everybody, that answer is a little bit different. So feel free to keep asking the questions. I think. Okay, here's another one. And is it okay if you focus more on experiences of the workplace than what you might have done way back during undergrad? Yes, for sure. I usually don't recommend talking about undergrad in these applications that much. If you think about it, especially if you're 8 years out of school, it was a long time ago. You were different, you had a different maturity level. And so most likely things from undergrad are not good to cover. The more recent things, the better. Now, this is going to vary across schools. I know this is a Kellogg and Booth talk, so I don't want to sort of go too far off the subject. But certain schools have very specific rules where like they literally don't want to hear anything that's 2 or 3 years old. And there's one school, which you'll have to reach out later if you want to know which one, but that from a recommender, they don't want recommenders that are 4 years old. So these things really vary across the school. But if you're applying to, let's say, Harvard, right, and you have this dramatic story about what you did in middle school and how that helped shape you in high school and why you chose the major you wanted to choose in college, that can absolutely get you accepted to school. So the how far back should you go really does vary across the school. And so that's why it's important to, really just think about school you're applying to and what they're looking for. If you don't know any of these things and you're not having any help, try to write about things post-college. I think it's probably the safest route. So here's another. Yeah, you can jump in if you want.
Yeah, Scott. So, with your permission, I'd like to kind of speak to two types of students. The first one is international students, because I'm an international student. And I saw in the chat, and from general chats to international students, two key things that worry international students. One is the funding. So are there scholarships? Will you be able to afford it? And then the second one is the GMAT and the GRE. And so to both, and also the age, right? So because of the way the schooling system works, sometimes international students are usually older. I think Saranya had that question. And so I think Scott has spoken to it. I have classmates who are 10 plus years experience and some who maybe are just 2 or less, Personally, I was 10. I think I had 10 years experience when I got in. I was older than the average. I also have classmates who are really, really, really young, super geniuses. And in terms of the funding, I personally, and this is my personal view, is that money should be the last thing you think about. And I'm not just saying that to comfort you. It's literally the last thing you think about, right? So I have never heard of anybody in my class who got in and then was like, well, how do I pay for it? So the important thing is for you to get in. There are scholarships available, and if not, there's financing loans available. Companies will be knocking at your door to give you loans, and if you're worried about whether you can pay them back, of course you can, especially if you get into one of these top programs. So I just needed to get that out there.
Yeah, and Niso's not saying that coming from a place with tons of wealth either. Even paying for our services was something that we had to sort of figure out, but it all works out at the end. When you get that McKinsey offer, the numbers make it. Okay, so let's see the next question. What is the minimum GRE and GMAT score to get into the top school? So I hate to not give you value because you're coming here, you're listening to a consultant. I'm not an admissions director. I don't have to say it depends. I can be honest, but truthfully, there is no specific minimum. I need to know a lot more about you, right? And they're really looking at so many different factors of an applicant. A lot of this just depends on, what does someone like you generally get on an exam, right? And I'll be vague in that way on purpose because they need to have different people from a lot of different backgrounds. So if you happen to work at Goldman Sachs in investment banking in New York, and there are, 10 people in your office that are applying to school, it might be tough to get in if your stats are really low, but if you're filling in this, sort of pool that they're looking for more candidates from, then maybe it is a little bit easier to get in with a slightly lower grade. And that fill in the blank, that pool can be anything. It can be region, it can be type of company, it can be, there was a year when I know Harvard and Wharton and Booth, they were all taking, kind of wanting folks from let's say a certain company that rented office spaces and then re-rented them, and they got a high valuation, and then all of a sudden things went down. Won't fill in the blank here, right? You can guess. And so when there were people that really sort of saw that wave, they ended up, finding their way into Harvard because, Harvard wanted those people in the classroom to talk about what happens when you're at a company that goes through some good and bad times. So diversity can mean so many different things, right? Diversity of professional background is something that not everyone thinks about, but can certainly be important here. Is it better to apply in round 1 with 730 than round 2 with 750 plus? So that's a question I can answer. No, it is not. I would rather have you in round 2 with 750 plus. I don't care who you are, what your background is. I think that if you're getting 20, 30 points more in a GMAT, wait until the second round, almost always. And this does vary based on the school. Certain schools, like let's say Chicago Booth, is a slower school to make decisions. They don't fill up in round 1. Round 2 is a totally fine round, and they waitlist a lot of people. And we have a lot of people every year. I mean, just from our company alone, we have at least 5-6 people that get off the waitlist for Booth every single year, sometimes more. So if you're going to get a higher score in the second round, it might be better to wait for that. Now, of course, I don't know you and your background. Possible that with 730, everything is amazing and you would get it anyway. And so then you could just apply. But almost anytime if I hear I can get 20 or 30 more points, I'd rather wait to get those points. And then is round 1 better than round 2? Yeah, I mean, I talked about this to some extent already. Look, we're in an interesting year. I mean, one of the reasons I get excited about doing this work now is there's a lot that's going on. This isn't a normal time when we can predict things. All of a sudden, a couple years ago, we had this round 3 spike where every school needed people in round 3, and we sent tons of folks, and round 3 application numbers went up, 400%, and schools were waiving GMATs. There's all kinds of things happening. Now you have a situation where vaccine rates are higher, so people are getting more comfortable, but now variants are coming in. So what's happening? What is the world going to think about for business schools by the time January comes? And some of this is really tough to predict. I think last year was a lot of demand. The schools have not released their class profiles yet, but you'll see it reflected in the numbers. So for a lot of the schools, there was a lot of demand. Round 1 this year started out slow and is now really picking up quite a bit. So by round 2, I think it's going to be more competitive, but who knows? This really just depends on the school as well. So here's a question. Can you share your experience about experimental lab courses, and are there restrictions for international students, and what were your favorite lab courses? Sounds like a question for one of you. I don't know who wants to tackle that.
Yeah, I can speak to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I did do one lab course. Booth has several of them. So I did new products and services. And no, for that, it was more like a class. And so I didn't need any, external approval. I do know there are other lab courses that entail you actually working with a company for less than 20 hours a day. And so all you need is CPT approval from your school. And you should be able to do that. Sasha, you have a different view?
No, agreeing the same thing. We had, I've taken a lab course where you work with a local company and it was just class-based. I think if you were to you could do an independent study where you work kind of as an internship during school, but for that, it would still be, you don't get paid for it. It still comes off as a class. So I think you're still good. There's no restrictions, international or US-based.
Great. So here's a question. I'm an Indian chartered accountant with 4 years of financial consulting experience. When should I look to apply, and which business schools would suit my profile? So I think if you have 4 years of experience, it's probably the right time to be thinking about applying, because then you would matriculate with about 5 years if you apply now and go next year, and that's the average. So I think it would be a good time to think about this year or maybe next year. As far as which schools, Vinit would love to connect with you offline if you're interested in exploring things further to learn a little bit more about you and what you're looking for. Certainly Kellogg Booth could be great schools. It depends. If you have consulting experience, what do you want to do after school, right? I always look at the sort of post MBA interests are actually more important than the pre MBA interest. We're almost wrapping up, but believe it or not, last thing I'll say is what you've done won't get you into one school versus another school. It's really what you want to do going forward and how that school can set you up. So really appreciate everyone joining in today. GMAT Club, thanks so much for having us here, Abhijit and team. Niso, Sasha, amazing. I couldn't do this without you. If you had to sit here and listen to me the whole time, it's not as exciting. So thank you so much for your contributions. And everyone, if you have any interest in exploring working with us, visit our website, personalmbacoach.com. We'd be happy to connect with you and tell you a little bit more about what we do here. Watch for our other videos on GMAT Club. Like I said, we're having a behind the MBA admissions curtain video coming up soon. So yeah, really appreciate everyone for joining in. Best of luck. Stay safe out there, and hope to see you soon.